Many Pokemon abilities have seen nerfs throughout the generations. Some were pretty overpowered abilities that needed it, while others were just slightly tweaked. Today we're going to look at the abilities that received direct nerfs and the effect they had on them competitively. We already looked at lucky abilities that received buffs, now it's time to see which abilities suffered. There are a few slight nerfs that we're going to cover at the end of the video, so make sure you stick around and let me know which ones you weren't familiar with. The first nerf we're going to cover is everyone's favorite ability. Oh yeah, buds, we're talking about Intimidate. Intimidate lowers the attack stat of all adjacent foes by 1 stage. It's widely considered to be one of the best abilities in the game. Now this ability functions the same as it always has, but there's been so much counterplay added to combat Intimidate spam that I had to include it in here. We looked at a few abilities that were buffed to block Intimidate in Generation 8. These are Oblivious, Own Tempo, Inner Focus, and Scrappy. Pokemon with these abilities will not have their attack stat lowered by Intimidate users. In addition, Pokemon with the Rattled ability will gain a speed boost when intimidated. They also add an ability in Generation 9 called Guard Dog that raises the user's attack instead of lowering it when intimidated. It's also worth a mention that there is a whole held item called the Adrenaline Orb that only interacts with Intimidate and raises the user's speed when intimidated. While this isn't a direct nerf to the actual ability as it functions the same, the amount of counterplay added warrants its addition to this list. Needless to say, this ability is still top tier, as these other abilities aren't exactly too common to see in competitive play. A big nerf, however, is Talonflame's signature ability Gale Wings. Did I say big nerf? I meant to say massive, humongous, gargantuan nerf. Gale Wings originally increased the priority of all flying type moves to +1. This was amazing for Talonflame. Priority Brave Birds, Roost, Tailwinds, Acrobatics, even Defogs. Talonflame would get to use those moves first. It allowed an early route bird with these dreadful stats and 4 times weakness to rock to be viable and even thrive in singles and doubles formats. Then, after a successful generation, they clipped Talonflame's Gale Wings and heavily nerfed it in Generation 7. It now only gains priority on its flying moves when it's at full HP, meaning a lot of times you will only get 1 use of this ability. And if you're using Brave Bird, you are breaking your own ability thanks to the recoil. So a lot of Talonflame's utility just vanishes, since you only have to chip it from 1 HP to get rid of its priority attacks. It usually prefers Flame Body in singles nowadays, not always wanting to try and make Gale Wings work. Its speed is its only good stat anyways, so the priority isn't always needed. It's still fine in doubles as priority Tailwind is still really good when it first comes out, but its value as a whole has definitely suffered with this massive nerf. Prankster is an ability I talked about recently in my video covering abilities with negative effects. Prankster gives any status move +1 priority. It's a great ability for sure, but it received a pretty big nerf in Generation 7. Dark-type Pokemon are now immune to moves targeted at them that gain priority thanks to Prankster. This means if you use a Prankster boosted status move into a Dark-type, the move will just fail. This only works for moves targeted into that slot, and it doesn't protect allies or moves that target the user. This ability is still really strong, especially in doubles formats, but they did give it considerable counterplay considering most teams like to have a Dark-type around. So you don't really need to prepare a specific Prankster counter when team building. The next abilities to cover all have the same nerf. These are the 8 abilities introduced in Generation 6. Aerialate, Pixelate, and Refrigerate. These abilities all turn normal type moves into stab moves for their user. Aerialate turns them into flying type moves, Pixelate into fairy moves, and Refrigerate into ice moves. They also gave them a 30% power boost. This was very strong for Pokemon like Sylveon, Mega Gardevoir, Mega Pinsir, and Mega Salamence, while even giving Mega Glalie some solid tools. Unfortunately for them, in Generation 7, this boost was brought down from 30% to 20%. Not a massive nerf, but it still hurt the mons who love these abilities. The 8 abilities are still very good, and the slight power decrease isn't super game changing, but it does help to balance some of these stronger users. I wasn't sure if I should consider this next ability in the main part of the video or not, but it is a pretty big nerf when I think about it. Magic Guard is an ability introduced in Generation 4 that prevents the user from taking indirect damage. So Weather Chip, Leech Seed, Status, Trapping moves, and other damage that isn't directly from attacks will not occur. A pretty nutty ability, but did you know it was even nuttier in its debut generation? In Generation 4, Magikarp also had the effect of preventing the user from being fully paralyzed and unable to move. You could still receive the status and speed drop, but you didn't have to worry about the 25% chance to not move, which we all know is like 50% minimum when you are parried, and like 10% when your opponent is. You also could not be poisoned by toxic spikes, which could come into play as moves like Hex and Venoshock wouldn't be powered up. From Generation 5 onwards, Magikarp Pokemon experience paralysis like the rest of the gang and can be poisoned by T-spikes. With para being such a common status condition, this definitely should be seen as a big nerf, as having to only worry about the speed drop would be phenomenal. This next nerf I think everyone should know about. It's for the Generation 6 introduced ability, Parental Bond. This is Mega Kangaskhan's signature ability, which allows most of its attacks to hit twice like a multi-strike move. The first hit will be at normal power, while the second hit is half power. This not only gives a massive power boost, but also other benefits, like more chances to crit, more chances to activate secondary effects, the ability to break through substitutes, sturdy, and focus sash with the first hit, and hit directly or KO on the second. Moves like Power Up Punch gain 2 attack boosts in 1 turn. Really a lot of useful things. It's really no secret this was a busted ability. This dumb kid coming out of the pouch shouldn't add that much power. Thankfully the devs realized this and decided to take the kid off steroids. Parental Bond was nerfed in Generation 7. The second hit now only deals 25% of its usual damage, making it a good amount less threatening power-wise, but it still keeps a lot of its amazing traits. Your Rock Tomb still lowers speed by 2 stages, Seismic Toss is fixed damage that 2-shots most mons, Body Slam still has a great chance to paralyze, along with Bite having a great flinch chance. It just takes a bit of damage off the actual moves, like its priority fake outs and sucker punches. Next we're going to take a look at the newest ability on this list. This is Regielecki's signature ability, Transitor. In Generation 8, this ability multiplied the user's attack or special attack stat 1.5 times when using electric type moves. This gave Regielecki just stupidly strong stab attacks. It's pretty much just an electric type nuker that's so fast and hard to revenge kill. This ability was nerfed this current gen to only boost electric type attacks 1.3 times. This was clearly Regielecki's doing, as Regidrago has essentially the same ability in Dragon's Maw that wasn't nerfed at all. I'm gonna say Regielecki's 200 base speed probably helped make that decision. It's still a great ability though, as that's essentially a life orb boost with no drawbacks. We have a universal nerf here to all the weather abilities. These are Sandstream, Drizzle, Snow Warning, and Drought. These abilities will summon their corresponding weathers upon their user's entry. In Generations 3 to 5, any weather summoning ability would permanently activate the weather unless replaced with a different weather. This made weather teams very common, and weather wars would start with each team trying to pull off their team style. Come Generation 6, permanent weather from these abilities ceased to exist. Instead, they would last for 5 turns upon entry and could be extended to 8 if the user is holding their respective weather rock. This definitely limits the success of weather teams, as your weather is on a timer now and can't only be countered by being replaced. Long story short, you have to make the most of your turns now. It indirectly nerfed other abilities like Swift Swim and Chlorophyll, but we won't be including those in this video. Overall, I think this was a healthy change and put the weathers on a more even playing field. We've seen Sandstorm run rampant in Generation 3 OU, and it's pretty centralizing, but it definitely is a big nerf to those users and their beneficiaries. Weather can still be great, but luckily you can counter it by eliminating their setters and stalling out the turns. An ability I don't think anyone is sad about being nerfed is Gen 5's introduced nuisance, Moody. Moody is an RNG based ability seen on less than impressive Pokemon for the most part. It raises a random stat by 2 stages while lowering another by 1 stage. This can definitely be risky at first as you're chancing a bad stat drop, but as you stay on the field using Protect and Substitute, you gradually accumulate more and more positive boosts and can start to become unstoppable. A lucky evasion boost could be all you need to start cheesing out an epic, skillful win. And on users like Smeargle, you can grab a few extra turns by spamming Spore. This ability is annoying to say the least, and being a pure luck-based strategy eventually caused it to be banned in most Smogon tiers. It has its own clause even. In Generation 8, it was thankfully nerfed to not affect evasion or accuracy. These were bigger culprits of the luck-based issue this ability faced. Oftentimes it just came down to who can land an attack. And I'll tell you one thing, it didn't usually favor the opposition of the Moody user. It still is banned, but admittedly, it is a lot more manageable as you don't have to worry about missing your attacks. I guess in a small way, it could be considered a buff too, because accuracy boosts usually were the last thing you needed, so this just takes away a stat that wasn't useful to get a boost in. But I think the lack of evasion boosting still makes this an ability nerf. We looked at effect score's buffs from Generation 3 to Generations 4 and 5. While the buffs did help this ability greatly, giving it a much higher chance of proccing, in Generation 6, they introduced a mechanic that directly nerfs this ability. From Gen 6 on, Grass-type Pokemon became immune to Spore and Powder moves. And this includes the ability Effect Spore, meaning Grass types don't have to worry about getting status upon contact. This ability doesn't come up too often, but it is good to know you don't have to chance a status when attacking into a Vileplume, a Mungus, or a Shiinotic, I guess. The ability Overcoat was also buffed to be immune to Powder and Spore moves, along with the item Safety Goggles. These weren't specifically made to counter this ability, as it is by no means overpowered. It just falls into a category that unfortunately gained a lot of counterplay in Generation 6. Disguise is a signature ability of Mimikyu, introduced in Generation 7. It puts Mimikyu in its disguise form and pretty much prevents the first damaging move from doing actual damage. It kinda acts like a free substitute that doesn't block secondary effects. Any hit, no matter how weak or strong, will break this disguise, and then Mimikyu will be damaged normally on any subsequent attacks. This was really solid for Mimikyu, as it could even equip a Focus Sash and usually guarantee living 2 hits, since it would still be at full health after the first one. The following generation changed how Disguise works. It will now cause Mimikyu to take 1/8 of its max HP and damage when hit, and having its Disguise busted. This isn't tons of damage, but it is enough to break a potential Sash. Mimikyu no longer will be able to take 2 guaranteed hits, making it harder for it to have free setup. This was definitely bad for Mimikyu, but Disguise is still a pretty busted ability. The 1 free hit still allows Mimikyu to act as a good revenge killer. It can use a strong attack, followed by Shadow Sneak, or still grab a free Swords Dance or Trick Room opportunity for its team. Now we're about to get to some of the biggest nerfs to abilities, but just before we do, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Most of you watching aren't, and we're on our way to 20k subs by the end of the year. And I have some more absolute bangers I'm working on, including a long video where I rank every single ability competitively. Yeah, that's gonna be a lot of all-nighters trying to get that one done. Oh yeah, and I recently opened up a Patreon too, if you want to support the channel in another way. It helps me work on videos more regularly, as these take a lot of time to write and edit together. I'm working on bringing more perks and tiers, but for now you can see and hear your name at the end of each video. I'm hoping to add other fun elements like viewer suggested video ideas, a MatBud Discord channel, early video access, and some stream perks when I start streaming. But anyways, that's enough of that. Let's cover these last huge ability nerfs. Perhaps the most overpowered mod in competitive has been Mega Rayquaza. A Mega with a free item slot and an ability that eliminates its flying weaknesses. That's crazy. They gotta nerf that. Another Pokemon who is perhaps the most overpowered mod in competitive is Zacian. Base 170 attack with a free +1 to its attack upon entry as an ability. That's crazy, and I'm glad they nerfed that. While they might have left Mega Ray to be the super busted mod it is, they luckily took measures to nerf its successor. The ability Intrepid Sword would boost Zacian's attack by 1 stage every time it entered a battle back in Generation 8. Once the devs actually saw the carnage that would occur shortly thereafter, they showed some mercy by changing this ability to only activate once per battle. So if your Zacian wants to come in and get the attack boost, you have to make it count. This does limit Zacian's power considerably, but it is still a great Ubers Pokemon and would be even without an ability. Luckily they nerfed its base attack stat too, helping to decrease its tremendous power to more containable levels. But it wouldn't be fair to just pick on Zacian. Zamazenta was a far less powerful of the duo, sporting a more defensive build and not having quite as great of a typing, but its ability, Dauntless Shield, was also nerfed. It would boost Zamazenta's defense stat by 1 stage when entering a battle. But this was also changed to only activate once upon the first entry of a battle, mirroring Intrepid Sword's effect. Zamazenta also had a few base stats nerfed. These changes helped allow it to drop from Ubers to OU, which is kinda nice in a way, because it wasn't really the greatest Ubersmon in Generation 8, but now is really good in OU. The Crown form eventually would get banned, but as of now you can still use base Zamazenta in the OU tier. The last big ability nerfs before we get to the speed round are for the abilities Protean and Libero. These abilities are effectively the same and receive the same nerf in Generation 9. Up until Generation 8, these abilities would change the user's type to correspond with the type of the move they used. So if they use Tackle, they would become a normal type. If they use U-turn, they would become a bug type. This essentially gave you stab on every attack, and you could play around other attacks defensively by turning into a resist or immunity. It was a really amazing ability. Come Generation 9, this was nerfed to only activate for the first move the user executes. So you would get the type change, and then any other moves you use wouldn't change your typing again. You would have to switch out and switch back in to reactivate the ability. This definitely hurts the users of these abilities, as receiving the extra stat bonus was a huge power boost. You could use the typing's defensive properties to really mess with the opponents. I would love using Protean Kecleon to fake out my opponent and then Shadow Sneak on a fighting type move to gain an immunity. You could guarantee land a Toxic as a poison type, or get grass type's immunity to Leech Seed and Powder moves. It's still a great ability to this date, as oftentimes you would run a choice item on these users, so you will still get the benefits of the ability, but it is just a lot less flexible and easier to play around nowadays. Now it's time for the speed round. These are abilities that have seen very minor nerfs, but are still worth a quick mention. First one to mention is how they massacre the great ability Poison Point. In Generation 3, this ability had a 1 in 3 chance to inflict poison if the user was hit by a contact move. And from Generation 4 on, this is lowered to a measly 30%. You can laugh that one off, but every percent matters in Pokemon. So if you don't think that 3% means much, you should see how often I miss Air Slash at 95% accuracy. They did the same thing to my boy Flame Body. Generation 3 gave it a 1 in 3 chance to burn upon contact with the user, but Gen 4 lowered that to 30% as well, making it slightly less likely to burn. This is also true for the ability Cute Charm. It had its infatuation chance lowered to 30% from a 1 in 3 chance, but who really cares about that one? Infatuation is a stupid condition. The overpowered Klutz ability was thankfully nerfed. In Generation 4, you could actually fling an item with Klutz, potentially hitting them with something like a Flame Orb or Toxic Orb without suffering the effects of holding those items. Lucky for us, they nerfed it in Generation 5. Klutz users are no longer able to use Fling, so you don't have to worry about that. They will have to trick or switcheroo the item instead. I have one last small nerf I wanted to cover. It's for the ability Synchronize. In Generations 3 and 4, Synchronize would actually pass on the poison status from Toxic Spikes if the user was forced in to take the status. So if you were forced in with Roar or Dragon Tail, the Synchronized user would pass on the status. But since Generation 5, this is no longer the case, and Toxic Spikes will not activate Synchronize. They also changed the order that the move Psycho Shift works, and it negatively affected Synchronize. In Gens 3 and 4, the Psycho Shift user would pass its status on and be cured before Synchronize activated. They would then receive the status condition via Synchronize. In Generation 5, this was actually changed to have Synchronize activate before the Psycho Shift user had their status cured. This would in turn cause Synchronize to activate and fail, and then the Psycho Shift user would have their status cured. That one is more of a move buff than an ability nerf, but I thought it was cool enough to mention while we were on the topic. So that's all the relevant ability nerfs that I could think of. Let me know if I missed any, and which ability nerfs you think were good, or if you think some were too extreme. And don't forget to become a bud and hit that sub. Consider supporting me on Patreon, and if you like this video, you'll want to check out this one next. Take it easy, buds.